The X3 is Insta360's latest addition to their camera lineup and supposedly one of the best compact 360-degree cameras that is out on the market. Now, I wanted to know for myself, and I picked up one of these cameras a little while ago and took it on a recent trip to Egypt. What I found out about this camera when using it underwater, what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it, well, that's what we're going to look at in today's video. Coming up. Hey there underwater filmmakers, welcome back to the channel. As always, great to see all you smiling faces. Now, a little while ago, a couple months ago, I picked up the Insta360 X3 just in time before I left for our last underwater videography workshop of last year, back in November, to Egypt. I picked up the camera because I was really curious to find out whether or not it is a good entry-level camera and a stepping stone to getting into shooting 360-degree video underwater. I had personally never done anything like this before. I've never had any experience or done any work with 360-degree video shoots beforehand, so I was curious to see how it would perform underwater and how the experience would be and how the footage would turn out and if it would give the way I work and the productions I make, whether it would give some added benefit to these productions and to the work that I do. So this video today will be structured into 4 different sections. First of all, I'll talk about the scenarios, situations that I used the camera in and how I used it. Then in section number 2, I'll tell you what I really like about the Insta360 X3. In section 3, we'll talk about the things that are not so great in my opinion. And last but not least, I will give you a little summary and I will tell you what I think about that camera in general when it comes to filming underwater, and also I'll give you my opinion on who I think this camera is a good match for when it comes to filming underwater, obviously. But before we start with the first section of today's video, let me take a quick moment to thank the 3 latest channel members. Yes, 3 people have signed up for the membership program last week. The 3 people or 3 channels are Teh Tutis, John Turpins and Bendys Travel Adventures. Thank you so much guys for your support and for signing up for one of the membership programs. I will put the links to these channels down in the video description below, so feel free to go and check them out if you want. And if you guys also want to become a member of the channel, benefit from some cool extra stuff that you're getting as a member, while you're also supporting the channel here and enabling me to keep making these videos and the free content that I distribute here on YouTube, then feel free to click the button down below this video which says become a member, and this is going to take you to the welcome page of the membership area. Thank you so much for considering this, and thanks a lot to everyone who's supporting the channel through a membership. And now let's get to the first section of the video and the applications, the ways that I've used the Insta360 X3 on that dive trip on the underwater videography workshop in Egypt last November. Now, I also got the dive housing for the Insta360 X3. This is the original housing that is also sold by Insta360. And I got that in addition to the camera. This cost about $100 extra, in addition to I think the $550 or so that the camera cost me initially back in November last year. Now, I specifically got this even though the camera itself is waterproof down to 10 meters and they say safe to be taken without a housing down to 10 meters. I didn't feel quite comfortable doing this. I really wanted to have it in a housing. Also because I wasn't really sure how deep I was going to be going on each of the dives, and I didn't want to risk not being able to go any deeper because I had the camera with me, or going deeper accidentally and damaging the camera potentially on such a dive. So that's why I got the housing, and I'll get to the housing in a little bit in a bit more detail, because it is one of the things that is a bit controversial when we talk about this camera and using it underwater. But anyways, I had the housing attached onto the what they call invisible selfie stick. It was just attached there. I don't have the attachment with me right now. And this is how I used the camera underwater. The first scenario that I used was having used it as a normal action cam. So I had it on the invisible selfie stick, and I was just sometimes a little more extended, sometimes a little less. I was using it as a regular action cam, just holding it in front of me or to the side of me as I was going through my dives. So that was the first application. I just wanted to see whether or not it can act as a regular action cam underwater. Obviously, with the added benefit of being able to pick the appropriate, or pick the framing that you want in post-production, because you're filming 360, and you can then just pick whichever field of view you want to have in your final edit. You can pick that in post-production and don't have to decide which section of the reef you want to be focusing on as you're down there and filming. The second application, and that was probably the one that interested me the most, was that I had the invisible selfie stick attached to my large red Komodo rig, and obviously the Insta360 on top of it. And I wanted to get some selfie footage of me working and handling the larger camera underwater. And I imagined that this would be the perfect thing to do by having the Insta360 just attached onto the selfie stick, and the selfie stick onto the red Komodo housing, and just keep it running throughout the dive. And I'll just be doing whatever I do with the red Komodo, and I would have a normal field of view out to the front, or to each of the sides basically, as well as one coming back onto me, giving me a sort of a selfie view of me working on the larger camera. So the use as an action camera was pretty fine. I mean, it is really an action camera, even though it can film 360 degrees. The quality of the footage, the sharpness and everything is very similar to literally any other action camera that is out on the market nowadays. So it doesn't really, it's not really much different in my opinion to like a DJI Osmo Action 3 or a GoPro 10 or 11. Very, very similar. Maybe one difference is that the Insta360 X3 is filming in 5.7K in 360, and if you do that filming in 360 and then in post-production decide that you just want to use a frame 16:9 in your final edit, then this is obviously going to be cropped down to a full HD image. You're not ending up with a high resolution image anymore. You're just ending up with a normal full HD image, and that's probably a little different to using other action cameras underwater, where you do have your 4K or 5.3K or whatever it is what the other cameras can capture. Obviously you can capture 4K on that camera as well in a 16:9 aspect ratio, but then you're not filming 360 degrees anymore, but you're just choosing the front or the back camera and just using the sensor that way. That is also an option, but it kind of defeats the purpose of having a 360 camera for me with you underwater, giving you that flexibility of choosing your frame in post-production rather than framing it while you're down there on your dive. In the second application, where I tried to get a selfie shot or some selfie shots of me working on the larger Komodo rig, that actually didn't work quite as expected, and I'll get a little more into detail why this was the case when we'll talk about the things that I didn't like about this camera. But let's first talk about the things that I really like about the Insta360 X3. And there is actually a quite long list, so bear with me if I have to look down onto that list every now and then, so I make sure to not forget any of those things that I really like. First and foremost, I really like how easy and intuitive the camera is to use. And that's one of the things that I really like about all of these action cameras. Really, you can basically just pick them up, charge the camera, put an SD card inside, and you're good to go. You don't really need to read through a manual or watch tutorials on how to use these cameras. You'll get the idea pretty quickly as you start working with these cameras and going through the menus and the settings, and you'll figure it out pretty quickly as to what you need to change and how you can get the best possible shots. And even if you don't do anything, even if you just keep them on auto, you will get some decent looking footage out of these cameras. So that's great. Secondly, I do really love the big screen that the Insta360 X3 has incorporated there. Not that this is something very valuable underwater, and especially having it, you know, on the big selfie stick, like 1.5 meters, 2 meters away from you, you're not really going to be able to frame your shot or really see the screen from that distance. But it is nice to be able to change settings and see it on a properly lit and big screen. And that's also underwater a big advantage. Being in shallow water, a lot of surrounding lights, having a brightly lit screen and big numbers, it just makes it easier for you to figure out what setting you've just set and what setting you might want to set it to next. Talking about settings, obviously the touch screen, you can't use that underwater, whether you're using the camera underwater without the housing, and obviously also if you have it inside the underwater housing, the screen cannot be used, touch screen, which is not a big deal because Insta360 has made quite a good solution with the 4 buttons that they've integrated on the housings. These match the 4 actual physical buttons on the camera itself, and you can work through most of the menu and the settings by using these 4 buttons. Also, you have options of setting some presets that you can then quickly access by using one of these buttons, even when the housing or the camera is inside the housing when you're underwater, and you can access different presets that you've created prior to going into the water. So that actually works very well, very well, and the handling of the camera underwater has always been easy and nice, and I've never really felt like I really wanted to be able to use the touchscreen while being underwater. I also really like that you have a lot of different settings that you can choose from and a lot of different modes that you can choose from as well, which makes it quite versatile in terms of adjusting to different situations. Now, I've mostly used it in the auto mode, and that has seemed to work quite well, but you can, if you want to, set your white balance manual to a certain Kelvin degree. You can also choose between different color profiles. There's also a log profile, which is going to be a lot more flat and desaturated and will give you more leeway in creating the desired look in post-production that you're aiming for. And there's also different shooting modes. You have your 360-degree shooting mode, you have your regular action cam, 16:9 aspect ratio shooting mode, you have time-lapse, you have slow motion, you have photo mode. There's a ton of different modes that you can choose from, which makes the X3 a rather versatile camera. The battery was one thing that really surprised me positively. I thought that shooting 360 and having a big screen like this would chew through the battery quite quickly, but I was wrong. On their website, they say that the battery will last about 80 minutes on one charge, and that seems to be pretty accurate. Now, my normal dives are anywhere between 60 and 90 minutes, and I have never come to a situation where the camera was running out of battery life on me during a dive. I have to admit, I didn't have it on throughout the entire dive, but I did have it on for most of the dive and it was fine. So It works for a single dive. You don't really need to worry about running out of battery. And then once you get back onto the boat, you have two options. You can either just replace the entire battery pack, or if you don't have a second battery pack, then you can just charge the camera with a USB-C type connection, and that works great. Even though I prefer to use it inside the underwater housing for safety reasons, I do love that it is waterproof down to 10 meters itself, because it means that if for whatever reason the housing floods at a deeper depth and the camera gets wet, the pressure inside the housing, even though it has flooded, is not going to be the same as it is in the surrounding area. So therefore the camera will be safe, and by being waterproof, getting a little bit of water around it and getting wet is not going to be destroying your camera. You can simply just rinse it out after you get back onto the boat or back to the dive center, and it will be fine. And that's actually a big deal, meaning that even if your housing floods, the camera is not automatically destroyed. You can rinse it out, rinse out the housing, see what the problem was, and you're basically good to go on your next dive again. Last but not least, I also want to mention the software that comes along with the Insta360 X3. There's two different ways of how you can edit your footage, or what you can do with your footage. You can either do that with the mobile app on your smartphone, and that app works great, but I'm just not really, I'm not the type that likes to edit video footage on a smartphone. It's just too small and too complicated for me. I like to have it on my computer and to edit and work with the footage there. So for that scenario, they've got something they call the Insta360 Studio platform, and it's basically like a little editing software in itself. So you bring your footage in there, and then you can do a whole lot of things inside that application. The main thing is that you can frame or pick your frames. Like if you've shot in 360, then inside that that software, if you don't want to use the clip as a 360 clip, but much rather on a regular normal timeline in a, let's say, 16:9 aspect ratio, you can then inside that software define which part of the clip you want to have as your field of view, and then export that section of your clip. Now, obviously, if you've shot it in 5.7K and then you just pick a certain section of your clip, it's not going to be in such a high resolution anymore. It's going to drop down to a regular full HD resolution, which is still in my opinion sufficient for most scenarios and most cases that you're going to be using that footage for. Now, the cool thing is also that you can define in what quality the footage gets exported. You can define the bitrate, and you can also define whether or not you want to be exporting it in ProRes, in the ProRes codecs, which is great because it's going to make your life much easier, especially if you're working on Mac machines. They're just going to be working much easier with such a codec, much rather than other codecs, other video codecs that are available to export the footage in. Other cool features that you can do within that software is that you can, because now you're in a 360-degree space, you can actually do some panning, some tilting of the camera by using keyframes. That works actually quite well. If you have a subject that you want to track, there is a tracking function. For example, even if you're doing like a selfie shot, you can track your face, and the camera will stay on your face and keep your object in the middle of the frame. And that actually works quite well and is very, very easily done. It's just one extra step having to take the footage into that Insta360 Studio application, do all the little bits and pieces there, export it again, and then import it into your regular editing software and go on with your normal edit and integrate it in your normal timeline there. So enough praise for the Insta360 X3. Let's now talk about the things that I did not like quite as much. There is a few things here as well. First and foremost, one thing that I really didn't like and that really stressed me a little bit was that you can actually see the stitching in the underwater shots. And I think it's primarily because I've used the underwater housing, and you can see that the frame of the underwater housing is rather thick, and I think that the software had quite a bit of issues trying to stitch that footage together, and you can see it in certain shots. So that's something that I don't really like too much. I have to say though, I have never tried it underwater without the housing, and I do think that it would have been the solution to do that once or twice and see how what difference does it make. I didn't, and I regret it now, but I will definitely on my next trip, which is gonna take me to the Maldives in April, and I'll try to do some comparison shots there and see how the results are when I don't use the underwater housing. But then again, it means I cannot go any deeper than 10 meters. But I'll try it out just for the sake of curiosity and knowing whether or not it is going to make any difference in the results. Another big thing also connected to the whole stitching is that once the camera is inside here, the bottom part of the housing is actually visible on the lower third part of like the 360-degree image. And this basically means that I cannot use any part of the image, any of the lower parts of the image. And this was quite disappointing because on all the shots that I was trying to get of myself, the selfie shots of me operating the red Komodo and where I had the Insta just on the invisible selfie stick attached to the Komodo in front of me, all of these shots I would end up with this big thing blocking the view onto me and onto the red Komodo, and it made all these shots pretty much unusable. And again, I don't know if this was different. Probably would have been different if I hadn't used the housing, but just the camera as it is. Again, then I would have not been able to go any deeper than 10 meters, and I just didn't want to risk that. So I didn't do that, but as I said, I will try to get that done on the Maldives trip in April and give you a quick update on whether or not it does make any changes. Right now, as it is with the underwater housing, it is not really a 360-degree camera for me when used underwater, because that lower part, that lower third part of your image is simply not usable. You'll have to use the upper part of the whole image. You need to frame it into the upper part to be able to get away from all the weirdness that is happening in the lower part and not to get any distracting stuff in your image there. So that's not really, it's a bit of a fail for me, and I do think that, I don't know, maybe it's just not possible to create a underwater housing that disappears better. But with this underwater housing, you're actually crippling your Insta360 X3 to a regular action cam much rather than a 360-degree camera when used underwater specifically. Another thing, which is only a small minor thing, but I still want to mention it here, is that the camera inside the housing does get very hot after having been running continuously for about 15-20 minutes. And that heat starts then to form condensation inside the housing, which basically then kind of destroys your image. This is nothing unusual, happens to all polycarbonate housings. When heat builds up inside the housing, condensation happens. The easy solution there is, and Insta360 even includes some of these anti-fog stripes in the packaging when you buy the underwater housing. Just insert one of these into the housing, and they're going to be good for a couple of dives, and they will just soak up all the excess moisture inside the housing, making sure that you don't end up with condensation droplets on the inside of your housing. And last but not least, there is not a lot of accessories for the use of this camera underwater. Yes, of course, you have the underwater housing, but there is no filters, like no red filters or magenta filters that you can use on the housing. There is no other lenses, like for example a macro lens, like not that you want to be filming macro when you're doing 360, but if you want to use it as just a regular action camera and only want to use the front facing camera, it would be nice to have some option, some way of attaching a macro lens to be able to capture some smaller stuff. And this is at the time of recording this video, this is not possible. There is no accessories that will make you capable of doing that, and that is also a bit of a downer for me when it comes to the things that I didn't like about this camera. So what can I say about the Insta360 X3? Well, it's definitely a lot of fun shooting with that camera, also underwater. Is it a proper 360-degree camera when you use it underwater? Not really. Because of what we talked about before, if you're using it with the underwater housing, which you will have to do if you want to take it any deeper than 10 meters, the lower part of the housing will block the lower part of your 360-degree image and make it pretty much unusable, that lower part of your image. So for me personally, it's not really a camera that I would consider as a 360-degree camera, as long as I use it inside the housing. As said before, I'm not entirely sure how it will react when not used inside the housing, and in shallow water it might potentially be very different, and that might change the way I look at this camera as a 360-degree camera underwater. But again, the limitation is that you're not able to take it any deeper than 10 meters, even if that is the case. So who do I think this camera is for? Well, I don't think that this should be your primary camera for filming underwater and capturing your underwater adventures. I think that mostly people who already have an underwater camera, a primary camera that they're using to film their underwater adventures, and now they just want to get a gadget that is going to enable them to capture some more special shots. And I don't think that they have necessarily to be shots taken underwater, but they can also be shots taken underwater or just slightly underneath the surface, or even above water on a dive boat or something. You can get very creative with a camera like the Insta360 X3 and do stuff like the mini planet, where you zoom out and you get the round image and it looks like the whole image is set on a separate planet. So that you can really play around with creative ideas like these and integrate them into your edits. And I think for that, a camera like the Insta360 X3 is great and has a space in the bag of an underwater videographer or filmmaker. But it's definitely not a camera that I would recommend as your first and only camera to film underwater. And there you have it. Hopefully this little talk was useful to you and you got something out of it, and I was able to pass on some of my experiences and some information about the Insta360 X3 to you. And if that was the case, then please do not forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel so you're not missing out on any future content that will be uploaded here. Talking about future content, in next week's video we will talk about different ways how you can learn underwater filmmaking, underwater videography, and which way is best depending on where you are in your journey, in your developing journey as an underwater videographer. So if you don't want to miss out on that video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tune in next week again. And I'm also going to be revealing a new underwater videography workshop that we've just launched that will take place towards the end of this year. If you don't want to wait until next week to work on your underwater videography skills, check out the 2 videos over here to the side, which will give you some tips and tricks on how to quickly improve those underwater videography skills. Thanks for watching, guys. Enjoy capturing your underwater adventures, and I will see you next week.